Is it working? I don't even get a countdown anymore. Alright, that means I gotta go check YouTube and see if it's working. Stand by. Operator error. Technical difficulties. This is my second attempt at this. First one I talked for 25 minutes with no audio. Somehow my Streamlabs reset to disabled microphone. So we've got it up and running. Running. Let's see. Your channel. Oh, there it is. Okay. Live now. All right. So here's the story all about how he's in the news everywhere. He's still in the news. Poor Will. Hi, I'm Ron. I'm the Radiologic Technologist. .com, YouTube channel, podcast, Instagram, TikTok, blah, blah, blah. I got another email. I'm privileged to occasionally be asked to be interviewed for class projects. And this one comes from Caitlin at Palm Beach. She sent me 11 questions I'm happy to answer. I'm lucky enough that she lets me do this on video, so I don't have to type it all up. And in this case, it's my second attempt. But she said, I'm currently enrolled as a student, and I'm hoping to be accepted into the RA program in 2023. I really enjoy your content and found a lot of great info, and your memes are funny. I'll cut to the chase. I have a research project where I need to interview an industry professional. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind possibly answering a few questions via email. The questions are extremely basic and would only require a few minutes. Little does she know I talk a lot. So here we go, Caitlin and Palm Beach. Why did you choose this career? So, of course, we're talking about the career of radiography, and that's my blog behind me, the radiologictechnologist.com. I've got over 20 years in radiology. I found it very difficult to find any information when I first started. And so I decided to spend about the last 3 years blogging and vlogging my experiences so that people searching for information can find it. And I figure I qualified because I went through x-ray school and got licensed in CT, and then went back to school, 2-year program for ultrasound, and then I learned MRI on the job. And then I took my bachelor's and got a master's in radiologic science from Weber State. And then I got my doctorate out at Nebraska Methodist, healthcare leadership. And so I've gone from being an x-ray tech all the way up to system director, where I was over all the radiology departments in my system throughout the state. And I did it all in 20 years. And so it's not much I haven't seen, but I chose this career because I was looking for something that I felt was economy proof, so to speak, something that everybody would always need, and never would have expected anything like COVID to disrupt the industry like it has, which just goes to show nothing's bulletproof. But at the time, pre-COVID, I thought, well, everybody needs healthcare. Everybody's always going to need healthcare. And I had gone to a local medical institute for phlebotomy first. And that same school had a program for radiography. And after doing phlebotomy for a while, and I really enjoyed it, I liked the medical aspect of it and the clinical aspect of it. But patients were never super excited to see you at 4 o'clock in the morning when you come into their hospital room to stick a needle in their arm. And so over time, I decided to try to expand my horizons, and I went back to the same school and went to x-ray school. And part of why I share this stuff on blogs and YouTube channels is because, you know, when you say, why did you choose this career, it was basically because I wanted something in healthcare that I thought would be stable. But I found out so much more about the field once I got into it that you just don't know until you're in it. And that's why I share it now. So I'm glad that I chose my career now, because I found out once I was in it that there's just a plethora of advancement opportunities. There's also a lot of different ways to make more money. So you not only get raised every time you go to a higher modality, but you can get paid more based on what shift you work at the hospital. Second shift pays more than first shift. Third pays more than second. Weekends pay more than during the week. And so it's easy to kind of stack up your income um, by manipulating your schedule. And then on top of that, what other career other than healthcare allows you to work 12-hour shifts? So I could work 3 days a week and have 4 days off to do what I wanted to do. And so the basics back then are what led me to the career. It's just a job in healthcare that I thought would be stable. But the next question, why do you love, or what do you love about your job? What drew me to it initially also was just solving problems. I like to solve problems. I have found that in my administrative career, when you start at a new hospital, of course, you've got all these issues that you have to address. And after about 3 or 4 years, you get a lot of the big problems kind of ironed out. And I could feel that I was starting to not, I guess, lose interest is the best way to put it, because it just became a matter of, you know, running the daily operations, which is kind of monotonous. Solving problems is what I like to do. So when I started solving problems for patients is really a lot of what radiology does. People come to the hospital with an ailment, they present to the ED, the doctor says, let's do labs and some x-rays or a CT, and it's us in radiology and the folks in the lab who hand the information, if you will, over to the physicians who then interpret it and decide what to do. So what I love most about radiology is that you're helping to solve a problem. It's not always solvable. The human body is very complex, but for the most part, you know, if somebody breaks a rib and they come in with chest pain and you take the x-ray, there's the fractured rib, you ultimately solve the problem. And nobody else is able to do that. Nobody else has, you know, true x-ray vision. So with the different modalities, we're able to find problems and solve issues. Number three, what is the best career decision you have ever made? That would be agreeing to cross training in different settings. First, it was as an x-ray student. My clinical instructor was the CT tech. And one of the things I tell students and people looking into it now is don't wait until you're handed a clinical rotation. Research where the clinical rotations are at your school and be wise about what you pick if you're allowed to pick them. Where I was at, we were allowed to pick in a lottery type system. But I researched, I found out who had clinicals on the weekends, and that was why I chose it, so that I could do a couple of 12 or 16-hour shifts on the weekend and use my weekday for work, because I had to work at the same time. And so where I chose to do weekend clinicals, the clinical instructor was a CT/X-ray tech, and he offered to teach me how to do CT while we were not doing any X-rays. And I could have said, no, you know, I'm overwhelmed already with x-ray. It's a lot to learn. I'll stay focused. Thank you anyway. But I chose to open my options and be of value to the team there as a student. So I learned CT and had that down before I even graduated. So when I graduated x-ray school, I got hired on, I had clinicals at 2 hospitals. I got hired on one as an x-ray tech working the Friday, Saturday, Sunday night shift, which gave me a decent salary bump. I was around $26, $27 an hour back in 2005, because it started at 17 an hour, plus there was a shift differential for working nights, plus there was a shift differential for working weekends. So by the time you stacked it all together, it was a pretty nice bonus. But at my second clinical rotation, they hired me part-time as a CT tech because I had learned it at their facility. They knew that I was capable. And so after graduating, I of course sat for the radiology boards and got that job as a night x-ray tech. And then I sat for my CT boards and passed that and got my part-time job doing CT, which ultimately led to a full-time position in CT at that second job. So my best career decision was opting to cross-train when it was offered. And then my second best career decision, I would say, would be going back to school for ultrasound. A lot of people, you know, don't like school. There's not a lot to like about it, but it serves a purpose. And I think a lot of people just go to X-ray and they're like, okay, I don't ever want to go to school again. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with school. When I'm in it, I can't wait to get out. But when I'm out, I feel like I'm missing something. So I'm sure that's what propelled me to get all the way through my doctorate. But um, the going back for ultrasound was also a great career decision because then it allowed me to have three modalities under my belt, which made me what I thought, more bulletproof. Of course, I've learned over 20 plus years that no job is 100% secure, and even if your boss loves you and your coworkers love you, another company can come in and buy the hospital and everything changes, or there's a lot of things that can cause issues. But those are my best career decisions: is cross training and going back to school for more modalities. Some people will argue that it's detrimental to learn multimodality because then your work just expects you to do it all and you don't get a lot of extra pay for it. But I still think it's best it makes you more valuable. And the more you understand more modalities, the more you understand how they interrelate, which gives you a better understanding of the big picture of medicine. And so I'll just leave that at that one. Worst career decision. My worst career decision, there's a couple of them. One is putting work before family. There was an incident when I was in management where one of my daughters was in a car accident while I was in the middle of about a $10 million negotiation for an entire imaging suite of equipment. And I got the call and I talked to my wife, and she said to her understanding there was no injuries. And so even though some of the people in the meeting were saying, hey, do you need to run and take care of your family? I said, nope, I want to see this through, and this affects my entire department and all my staff, and I'm going to stay here and see this through. And long story short, 2 days of negotiations, three major vendors, got it down to about 4.4 million when it was all said and done. And then my boss overrode my decisions and told me that I had to do a different set of equipment, and that not only did I have to do what I didn't want to do, but I had to go tell my staff that that was my choice to do it. And needless to say, I left early that day, and she allowed me to leave early because she could tell she said, you're red from the neck up. And yeah, because that's a crappy decision, and I can't believe you're choosing this route. So looking back, I should have never put work before family, and I'll never do it again. That boss had no respect for me, no respect for all the work that I'd put into that particular project, no respect for my employees. Anyway, always put family first. Always take your time off. Always use your PTO for you, not for your company. And the worst decision. The other one would be I stayed with a company for a long time because I felt loyalty, and this is kind of debatable whether it was a bad decision. But that Mesa General Hospital, where I went to X-ray clinicals and got hired as a CT tech, and then I went back for ultrasound school. I did my ultrasound clinicals there. So that hospital allowed me to really grow as a radiology professional. I did all my homework at work, on the night shift, and it was really great for about 7-8 years. And I felt there came a point where they weren't able to make payroll. Some changes were made in administration. The hospital started to close. A doctor bought it and opened it back up, and bad management led to not being able to make payroll. And while I saw many nurses and people jumping ship saying, if you can't make payroll, we're not going to stay here, I stayed on board, not because I was okay with not getting paid, because they did pay us ultimately, maybe a week or two late. And that happened 3 or 4 times where they couldn't make payroll. But I was blinded by what I felt was loyalty to a company that was just an entity. There's no love coming to you as an employee from an entity. And what ultimately happened was another company bought them out and let me go after several years of loyalty, and no raises for several years. And so the worst career decision on that aspect was when the writing's on the wall that things are starting to go downhill, it's time to start looking elsewhere. And one of the things I've learned over 20 plus years in the field is you actually make more money as a tech, and sort of as an administrator as well, but not necessarily. But as a tech, if you stay at a place for too long, your annual raises will never keep pace with the cost of living. They're supposed to, but they don't. And so the smart techs are the ones that'll work 2 or 3 or 4 years somewhere and learn something and then go somewhere else and get a higher rate of pay than they had at the previous. And then 2 or 3 or 4 years, maybe learn another modality and then go somewhere else. I saw more techs make more money faster that way than the ones that stayed 10, 15 years in their positions and got these little incremental raises. So those are the two worst career decisions. I've got others, but I wouldn't call them the worst. But what would you be doing if you were me now? So you're a student in your program. I would say just focus on being a student. If you have to work, you have to work. But for the most part, focus on being a student and learning what they have to teach you. There's two aspects to what you're doing right now. There's the clinical aspect where you're really learning what you're going to have to do on your job. It's like an old apprentice. It's an old school apprenticeship. And so what you're learning on the in your clinicals is what you're going to be doing day to day. But what you're learning in school is what you're going to have to regurgitate for your national board exam, which has very little to do with what you're doing day to day in your X-rays. But you're going to have to learn both. So you've got to keep your clinical people happy by doing what they tell you. You're going to have one tech tell you to shoot a chest X-ray at one technique, and then 20 minutes later, another tech's going to tell you a different technique. And it's going to be frustrating because you're going to say, why can't everybody have the same technique? But really what your job is as a student is to write down and absorb what everybody's teaching you, and then once you graduate, morph that into your own technique, your own thing. Protocols shouldn't change. Everybody should have to do an AP and lateral chest. But how you capture that chest with the technique is private to you. It can be whatever you set it to be. So I would focus on making the clinical people happy, because you can't get in trouble with your clinical, or that'll cause a lot of problems. And then focus on studying the best you can in your classes. If you have problems in your classes and you don't understand what's going on, form a work group, a study group, get together with other classmates, go over stuff. But there's also a ton of things out there right now on the internet. RadTech Bootcamp, the X-ray coach, or X-ray tech coach, something like that. There's so many of those now that they didn't have back when I was in school, that you can subscribe to. You can even maybe split that membership with people in your class, so it's not quite as expensive. And just study that material. I'm not really hearing a lot from students who are coming out of the ART exam saying, I failed it and had no clue what I was being asked. That's not really the situation. The situation for people who aren't passing are that they just, they got a 72 or they got a 73. They just barely missed it. And a lot of that's test anxiety. So you need to learn how to handle test anxiety. I have on my blog an article I wrote right out of the gates on how to pass your boards. And it's not just a matter of studying. Is this working? Did it go? Yeah. It's not just a matter, it's easier for me to go to the site map. It's not just a matter of studying the right material. It's about your study environment. It's about proper rest, proper nutrition. Let's see. Give me a second here. How to pass your ART board exams. So this is something I try to share as often as I can with students, because not very often you taught how to take an exam. And that's crucial, especially an exam like this where you just spent 2 years of your life and your money, and it all comes down to one test. So there's different types of study techniques, spaced repetitions, using timers, taking breaks when appropriate, that kind of thing. I list a lot of that stuff. And then how to maximize your study time by choosing where you study, how to focus on targets, using the right study tools, not letting people interrupt your study time, being disciplined about it, using good recovery time. And then there's different places, like I used Appleton and Lang, but there's also Mosby's. ART has content and question banks you can use. I talk about the exam day routine. Make sure you know where you're going for your test before you're actually headed to it. Because if you're right on time, or you're late because of traffic and you had the wrong idea in mind on where it was, or the wrong address or whatever, and you're late, you get locked out and you miss it. So anyway, this article's good for helping you with the actual study. So your question number 5 is, what would I be doing? I'd be keeping everybody happy so that there's less waves, less ripples, less stress on you by fight. Like I used to fight one of my clinical instructors because he wouldn't comp me. There was two of us that were buddies, me and JoJo, and we would comp a foot and we'd show it to this one CI and he'd accept JoJo's and not mine. And that just seemed to constantly be the case with this guy. And I'd show that to another tech and they'd say, yeah, it looks good to me. And I fought that and it caused some trouble at my school. And so I learned just put your head down, do what you're told. I know that sucks, but that's what you have to do because not everybody's awesome. Not everybody's as awesome as you are, right? So focus on your studies, focus on what you're learning, take the practice exams, follow this outline on this article, and you should be fine. You should be just fine. And once you pass that test, you're done with it. Go out in the world, be a tech, and move on. So that's what you should be doing there. Number 6, how do you organize your time? I used to use a day timer, now I use my phone. I block time. You can find stuff on YouTube about time management with block timing. Basically, I just set it up where, I have little reminders, this block of time is used for getting up and showering and having breakfast, working out, whatever. Morning is where I do most of my heavy thinking stuff, classes or writing papers or, whatever. Build in your lunch. Of course, always carry extra food in your backpack because you never know when you're not going to get to stop for lunch. And then afternoon is, for me, is more of a reflection. What did I get done? What did I not get done? And then evening time is not related to school. Evening time is for you personally to do your hobby or be with your family or be with your friends, unwind, relax, unattach. And then at the very end of my evening, I have like a preview for the next day of what I'm going to be attempting to do so I can start getting mentally prepared for what the next day is going to look like. So I organize my time that way. My greatest strength is probably just being, just persevering. I would not have made it all the way to my doctorate if I didn't have the dedication to finish my goals. You will have a lot of people who will stand in your way. I remember my first several years as an x-ray tech. I'd go to shoot an x-ray in the emergency room and the patient would say, I was going to do what you do, but I have bills to pay. I couldn't go to school. I had to work. So did I. Well, I was going to be an x-ray person, but I have a family and it requires, all of my time. Well, I have 6 daughters and a wife and a mortgage and a job. So, a lot of people you'll hear excuses on why they didn't do it or maybe why you can't do it. So you need to just focus on your goals and make that a strength of yours. Don't rely on motivation. Motivation is fleeting. Get dedicated and get disciplined and just tell yourself you have to do so many hours of studying every night. You have to do so many competencies per week. If you rely on being motivated by a certain song or a certain person or a certain cliche, that's fleeting and it won't last you long enough to get the job done. My greatest weakness would probably be procrastination. I did get all the way through my goals, but I did write a lot of papers at the last minute. I'd like to say that the extra pressure makes me work extra hard, but it also gives me extra stress. So one thing I could improve on is when I have extra time, when I have spare time, if I get done with everything, instead of just vegging out, watching a movie or playing with my phone or playing on the internet, I could be working on another project to be incrementally getting it accomplished. So that's something I'm working on. Number 9, how do you make your decisions? On a basic level, there's the old Ben Franklin approach, the pros and cons list. Sometimes just listing your pros and your cons of a decision give you this macro view of, man, there's a ton of cons and not very many pros. That's probably a good indication it's a bad idea. Or vice versa. A lot of pros and not very many cons. Well, how serious are these cons? Maybe there's a big fat con that overrides a lot of these little pros. So I like the pros and cons list that Benjamin Franklin did. And then I also tend to default on, if I'm not sure whether or not I should do something, I tend to not do it. And I think it's easier to regret having not done something than to do something that explodes and then you're left with the remnants and you can't undo it. So that's kind of my philosophy there. What do I read? I'm not reading the magazines. Used to do all the industrial magazines. And in administration, you get 20 plus a month delivered to your office. Those are kind of fading, just like the newspaper faded. So I read Aunt Minnie. AuntMinnie.com is where most radiology stuff I find is. Um, I have radiology as a keyword on my Google News alerts, and that keeps my inbox full. I have to be careful I don't spend too much time sifting through all that stuff. But I just try to keep ahead of the latest news in radiology, the latest inventions. Um, I do read some self-help stuff, some time management stuff, but I just don't feel I'm 50, and I don't feel like there's a lot of new stuff on that. I think the old stuff by Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar and um, the highly effective habits, 7 highly effective habits of people. I can't remember. Stephen Covey. A lot of that stuff is just still true today. A lot of that doesn't change even with technology. You just move from keeping track of your schedule in a book to keeping it on your phone. So I just try to keep ahead of recent events. And what do you think are the secrets to your professional success? Well, just sticking with it. Uh, Going from an X-ray tech or an X-ray student to the system director over the entire state in actually it was under 20 years. I think is a major feat. It allowed me to see a lot of things. I got to be a delegate for my system for a group purchasing organization, which meant I was flown to Nashville 4 times a year to participate in contract negotiations from vendors. So they'd be scheduled to come pitch us. We would determine who we wanted to put on contract or not. We'd ask them a bunch of questions. I went to RSNA many years in a row. Got to see all the new technology there. I think being immersed in your profession is a part of your success. If you're a clock puncher, and we still have those people that just clock in, do their job, clock out, and they'd say, don't call me, don't bother me. You're not going to be as successful in your career as you would be if you dive in. Hold offices. I was the president of the state Idaho Society of Radiologic Technology at one point. I volunteered at the AHRA conventions. So, getting to know people in your career around the country, getting involved. We have a Facebook group, the Radiologic Technologist group, where over 4,000 techs talk about current events, their problems, their issues with their equipment, problems with positioning. I think all of that aids in professional success is networking and being excited about what you do. And I guess that's it. I hope that helps you. And I hope you enjoy your pathway. The RA program will be very exciting. We are in desperate need of mid-level providers in the world of radiology. Everybody else has them, right? Doctors have PAs, anesthesiologists have nurse anesthetists, physical therapists have PTAs. There just isn't a lot of a mid-level. There you got the radiologist who doesn't have a clue what we do, right? You can't tell the radiologist to go shoot his own C-spine. And then you have the technologists who do all the examinations, and we know what we're looking at, but we're not trained in analyzing and reporting out what we see. So there's a gap there, and that's where it used to be the RPA, the Radiologic Practitioner's Assistant, was a great fit. But the ACR, and I've got an article about that, but the ACR wouldn't get behind it at the time because that program was over 23 years ago that it started. What was her name? Jane Van Valkenkamp or something like that. It was started in the military. Military said we don't have enough doctors, so let's train an X-ray tech to be kind of a radiologist, sort of, kind of. And the RPA program was started at Weber State with the help of the military, and I got into that program, And I was doing lumbar punctures, and I was actually reading chest X-rays. It was all, had oversight from the radiologist. But we don't have enough radiologists, and they need more help. But at the time, the rads were scared of it. They didn't want their field being taken over, just like the anesthesiologists. They didn't want nurse anesthetists either, and physicians didn't want physician assistants. I mean, at every level, this is always fought. But at some point, they realize, hey, if I'm a doctor and I have a practice and I can hire 3 PAs to run my practice while I sit back and do other stuff, I can make even more money than if I ran it by myself. So they've all come to grips with it, except it was too late for the RPA program. It finally folded about 2, 3 years ago. But in the meantime, the ARRT, or the ASRT, anyway, they got behind the ACR for the most part, got behind the RA programs and started backing it, and that's why you now have 20 plus programs of RA around the country. They actually went and looked at, if you didn't know, that the RA people, the RA school people went and looked at the RPA program, and were in talks about expanding it and growing it, but there was some headbutting there about how it would work. And so the RA people walked away and started their own program, and that's where the RA program came from. And now it's widely accepted, but it doesn't have the breadth or the depth that the RPA program had. Like, you'll never see an RA being allowed to wet read, or interpret. And the ones I've seen go in and do the fluoro placement for the needle placement on a lumbar puncture, and mark it, sterilize, get it all ready, and then they have to go get the rad. The rad comes in, pushes the needle into lumbar spine, checks it real quick again, and then they leave, and then the RA hooks everything up and drains out the fluid. And so there's still not quite the autonomy for the RA that there was for the RPA, but maybe over time we'll get there. But the RA is definitely needed, and I'm glad to see you're going into that. Not many people are aware of that option. And we all know once you get an X-ray, you can go into CT and MR and ultrasound and nuke med and PET scanning, all that stuff. But RA you don't have RAs at every hospital, so not everybody knows about it. So anyway, good on you, Caitlin, and I hope this helps. And I better shut myself off because I can go for hours. So